Welcome back. Today we are talking with Charmaine Chan, who is a Singaporean journalist and author. She's currently based in Melbourne. I'm delighted to have her join me today. She's the author of the book The Magic Circle, which was published in 2020, which I read recently on my departure from Singapore and very much enjoyed. It is the true story of Charmaine's family and the tragic death of her sister from cancer. And it was a very touching and emotional book, which I very much enjoyed. And I'm really delighted to be talking to Charmaine today. Hi, Charmaine. How are you?
Hi, Charles. Thanks for reaching out. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to talk about the book and to introduce it to your followers.
Fantastic. Well, I'm delighted to have you with me today, and I have a few questions. I guess I'll start with the first question, which is, how did the events of this book and the writing of the book influence your path as both a journalist and an author?
Well, considering that The Magic Circle is the very first book I've ever written, I think it was hugely influential in the sense that it set me down the path and pushed me into a genre that I found really unexpected, which is that of creative nonfiction. So in that way, it was it was actually surprising to me. I'd always wanted to be a writer, as in to write books. Ever since I was a little girl, I knew I wanted to write a book. And but I never thought I would write a nonfiction book. I always imagined myself doing something definitely fiction, fantasy, I don't know, historic. It was such a huge surprise to me, and largely because it's somewhat antithetical to my own nature. If people who know me personally, I think they found it surprising as well, because I was just the kind of person who I just didn't really like. I didn't really like to talk about myself, and there were a lot of things I was not comfortable talking about, right? And obviously what happened to my family was something that I was hugely uncomfortable talking about. And so to actually come out and write this book, it was just went against the grain of everything that I believed in or that I stood for. And but I felt like, I think the word that would be accurate, I felt compelled to do it.
It compelled in the sense that to share the story of your sister and the impact of her tragic passing on your family. Was that the compulsion that you felt inside you?
Yes. So actually, I felt the compulsion stemmed from the fact that she died so young, and then she died leaving a very young daughter, my niece. Yasmin was only 6 years old. And I think that was where my compulsion came from, because I was just gutted at the thought of her not having any memories of her own mother, and I wanted her to be able to get to know her mother, even if it was from my own trove of memories. So I actually wrote this book very much for Yasmin, and so when I wrote it, and the only reason I was able to even complete it was I wrote it telling myself that it was for me and it was for her, right? And that was basically what I kept in. I had that in mind the whole time I was writing the book, because otherwise I think I might have been a little bit, otherwise a bit, it can be quite paralyzing, right, to write something so private. So I kept telling myself she's going to be the only one who's reading this book.
And so how did you find, you're originally a journalist, how did you find the transition from being a journalist and I suppose recording events in real life to writing this real life event that was very close to home? What did that reveal to you as a writer and also as a journalist? Were there any discoveries inside you as to your writing process, your development of stories and so on?
Yeah, so I've been a journalist for like about 20 years, and I've been in the realm of lifestyle journalism, which is really fun, and I've enjoyed every bit of it. But of course, as a journalist, you're dealing like always with really tight deadlines, and you're dealing with editors, and and it's kind of like fast paced and pressure. It's like a high pressure kind of environment, and you're always you're writing within very tight parameters, right? And it's always kind of like there's not much ownership, right? You get in there and you interview the person, you get all the facts, and you churn out the copy, and then it's then on to the next one, on to the next one, on to the next one. And then and also because like I largely worked for magazines, and so like with every magazine, what you have to do is you have to take on the voice of the magazine. So you have to write in the style and the tone pitched to the correct demographic, right? And so what I enjoyed most about writing this book was that I was finally able to write in my own voice, like in the style that I wanted. And like it was so enjoyable because I had that complete freedom, like at long last. I could write the way I wanted.
It sounds very liberating to be able to express yourself in whichever way you want.
Yes, extremely, and also like when you write a book, you get to and the process of editing with my editor was also thrilling, right, to me, because you get to talk about things that you don't talk about as a journalist. You get to talk about narrative devices, literary themes, like creative tension, things like that. That thrilled me to my core. Yeah. So I really enjoyed it very much.
And do you think that that'll influence you and impact your writing as a journalist when you write again for newspapers or magazines?
No, they're quite separate. Yeah, it's kind of almost you put on a different hat. Because, I mean, that has my journalist work continues to this day, right? I'm still working as a journalist. I do a lot of, but I also do a lot, in addition to writing, actually the bulk of my work is editing. I do a lot of copy editing and sub-editing. That's my bread and butter, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and it's so different from writing. It's a different art almost. Yeah. Right.
So this book was so personal. I mean, as you just said, in terms of having the freedom to express yourself in the way you wanted, but also very personal in terms of the subject matter. And you wrote a very sincere and authentic book with regard to the emotions that you were facing in this tragic situation. Did writing this book help you and your family with the grieving process? What was your family's reaction to this book? How did it bring you closer together in any way, or what? Because in a way, you show us your family in this book, and I'm just very curious to know how they interpreted the book and what you wrote.
Yeah. Okay. So there are several questions in your one question. I will take them in turn. So I'm glad that you used the phrase grieving process as opposed to cathartic, because I had so many people ask me, was it very cathartic writing this book, right? And I was like, it's a very interesting question, because and my answer is actually not really, because the writing of the book was a very long, drawn out process. Like it took me 10 years to finish the book, and no, I did not write it to heal. I would have healed without without writing it, and actually, like, I would not recommend it as a way to anyone going through loss and grief to do this. I mean, I would recommend journaling, but not writing a book. I feel like the obverse was true. Like, I needed to heal before I could like achieve the requisite amount of detachment to be able to write something that was meaningful and could resonate with people. I don't know whether you understand what I mean, right? Like it's almost like I had to, because I wanted to distill meaning from this entire experience, right? Meaning that, so that it was just not like this, because the whole thing was so raw, right? And you're going through it and yeah, and like if you just wrote out of that experience, it would not aid or benefit anyone.
So the book was in fact a result of the grieving process, as opposed to part of the process itself. You needed to conclude that process before you could and distill what had come out of that process in order to write this book.
Yeah, it's kind of like I needed to achieve a certain level of healing before I could finish it, right? Yeah, so to speak. Yeah, I needed to get that distance and achieve that level of detachment. Yeah, so yeah.
And with regard to how your family interpreted it, did it bring you closer together? Did it help you discuss the event as a family?
Okay, so yeah, that's a good question. I wrote much of this book in secret, right? For most of the 10 years, I did it in secret. Like I didn't talk about it to anyone, because I wasn't sure whether, I wasn't sure whether it was ever, like I said, going to be for public consumption. But as it took shape and I became more confident that yes, I wanted more people to read it, because I felt that, it's about cancer, it's about grief and death and all these things that I think that it would help people, because I know that a lot of people are actually like suffering in silence, right? And because it's a very isolating journey. And so like I did feel that at one point that I would want to share this with a wider audience. And then so like when those thoughts came into my head and then I started to I sent a draft of the book, right, to my sister and to my cousin Lee, that because they feature they play quite large parts in the book, and I sent it for reasons not just about preparing them, but also for accuracy. I wanted to double check certain memories and see whether there were any inconsistencies or inaccuracies, and so it was also partly like a fact check, right? And I sent it to my niece, but not so much for that reason, because she was so young when all those things in the book happened, but that one was more for her to be emotionally prepared, right? Yeah. And then my mother, I told her about the book, right? But she didn't want to read it. And to this day, she has not read it. My mom gets super emotional, right? To this day, you just mention my sister's name and then she starts to cry. So she's that kind of a person. But she was surprisingly, she was very supportive about the fact that I wrote this book, and that the whole process, she was at the book launch and she was she bought the book and she gave it to her friends and all that. So so it's just that she didn't want to read it because it was just very, very painful. So in that sense, I mean, if you ask me about how it impacted my family, I realized that after the book came out, because after my sister died, there's this veil of silence that came down over my family, unspoken, no one talked about my sister, for 10 years, right? Because for one thing, we were all living in different parts of the world. And so when we did meet up, we didn't want, I think nobody wanted to bring it up because nobody wanted to we were so afraid of making each other cry, right? So we went the opposite way, and we just never spoke about her. But that that wasn't right either, because then it's almost like we were erasing her from our lives. And yeah, and everybody was so scared, you know, like walking around eggshells, and especially if my mother was around. And then so it was the opposite thing where, you know, and then I realized like, oh my gosh, we're not talking about her, we're pretending like she never existed, we are like forgetting her, right? And the book kind of, when it came out, it kind of gave us the permission to talk about her. So in that way, it was healing, right? Because when we talk about her, she comes alive again, right? And she takes her place in our midst as, you know, the place where she rightfully belongs. So I felt that was a very valuable thing that the Magic Circle accomplished for my family.
Absolutely, and you paint an amazing picture of that sister as a really strong, creative character with a lot of style, and so in a way you preserve her memory in an amazing way. So to me, it felt very powerful. So in terms of the literature and your involvement with that, I read this book as a swan song for my departure from Singapore, and you know, I regret that over the years I didn't read enough of the local literature, and so I'm curious about this book. Do you think it's going to help develop a Singapore literary scene? Do you think how can it? Are there any elements in what you wrote that you think are specifically Singaporean and that can help establish it in that scene? I realize it's a very broad question, but what about your book makes it Singaporean, if anything?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I had to think about this a little bit. I mean, I think the first time I was confronted with this was when the book was shortlisted for the 2018 Singapore Literature Prize in the non-fiction category. And like I was having this conversation with a friend, and she asked me, she said, "Oh, tell me about the other books in, you know, it's competing alongside the Magic Circle, right?" And then after I described them a little bit, she said, "Oh, you know, like it sounds like your book is the least Singaporean of all of them, you know." And I was like, you're right. And like, and I've always known that in some sense that I'm not truly like representative of the average or typical Singaporean, right? And I've been asked before, like, what makes Singaporean literature Singaporean? And I feel like the very simple answer to that question is that it is written by a Singaporean, you know, right? And I'm a Singaporean. I may not be representative of the average Singaporean, but that makes me no less a Singaporean. Born and bred, I am a true blue Singaporean, right? Yeah, and I may have a global perspective that because of like I think the amount of relocation I've gone through, you know, for many different reasons. But yeah, I feel like that does not make my writing any less Singaporean. Yeah. And in fact, like actually living abroad for so many years, right, it has given me this idea, like I've actually had to stop and think, like, like it's made me think about what's Singaporean, right? What's Singaporean about a Singaporean? Like what makes us who we are, and
what's Singaporean about Singapore?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm sure you've come up with your own conclusions since you lived there for 7 years, but like I've often been in places where, you know, I lived in Guam, right? And I think I was one of 12 Singaporeans on the island, right? And I was
that's a bigger number than I would have expected.
Well, most of them were working for the same company that my husband was working for, yeah. And I was like, at that time, I was working in the newspaper. I was like, I was sub-editing their newspaper, and then they put a little blurb in the newspaper, and saying, introducing me as their newest staff member. And then because of that, all the other Singaporeans on the island emailed me and said welcome and all that. And that's how I came up with the answer of 12 of us on the island, And then I think when we moved to Shanghai, and being in China also, it gave me a lot of opportunity to stop and think, what is it to be Singaporean, right? Because I've been in countries where I'm the only Asian face, and then suddenly in a country where I look like I fit in, but I completely do not fit in. And I think that for Singaporeans, we are often a real bridge. Whether we like it or not, we're a bridge between East and West, And in China, I have found myself so often in this situation of having to translate, Chinese to English, English to Chinese, or whatever. Yeah, and
from just a pure language point of view, or also a cultural misunderstanding point of view?
Largely language, but I guess with language comes culture. Yeah, but don't get me wrong, my Chinese is not that great, but it's easier for me to translate from Chinese into English, right? Because English is my mother tongue. Yeah, but that was a super interesting experience, because I've never felt more westernized than when I was in China, because then you realize how different you are, and how your mindset, because of our educational system, how we think, our perspective is completely different from that of a Chinese person, right? Yeah, our education system already kind of programs us a certain way, and I would say that it has been easier for me to settle into Australia, or when I lived in the UK or whatever, then China was a real shock to the system. Yeah, but I think that the main thing for Singaporeans is this whole funny cultural mismatch that and being where we lie along that spectrum between East or West. I think that's something that a Singaporean always has to figure out, no matter where they are.
Well, I think you used a very accurate expression, which is cultural mishmash, and I think that came out in your book. And I think another element that I thought felt very Singaporean was a look into the food. And there's a lot of focus on food and how food brings people together, brought your family together. And I spent a lot of times in the book drooling over your descriptions of food. What role does food play in your life, in your family's life, and in the average Singaporean's life? Because it is pretty critical, and I think people who aren't familiar with Singapore don't necessarily understand this very deep relationship with food.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I would definitely have brought up the theme of food. I think that if you lived in Singapore, you know that Singaporeans, that's really part of our collective psyche, this being food obsessed. It plays a very large part in our, it dominates our thoughts for sure. We think about it, write about it, dream about it, plan our holidays around it. And I don't know, I think it's partly geographical, our food heritage is really rich. We have a lot of rich traditions to draw from, right? Being where we are in Southeast Asia, and I aside from that, I really don't really know why we're all so food obsessed.
Okay, can I give you a hint, and maybe you can explain to people watching this more about it. I think a lot of it's to do with hawker centers and the prevalence of hawker centers, which is a food structure that is doesn't exist in other places. And so maybe you can tell us a little bit more about hawker centers and what role that plays in the average Singaporean family's life and relationship with food.
Okay.
Or perhaps you disagree. I just think hawker centers are very central to Singaporean identity, but maybe you don't disagree with that point of view.
No, I actually find it like, I think that your opinion on this topic is actually has more value than, because for me, you know, I grew up there and I don't know I feel like I don't really know what's unusual or like, you know, but then if you as somebody, you know, coming into our culture and experiencing it, and you found that was a really interesting, and like it was like probably the reason why we have this like kind of like foodie culture, then I would say then that's you know, I would take your point, so to speak. Like, because I grew up there and I don't know, you know, I wouldn't know life without it. So
yeah.
Well, so just to explain to the followers, the hawker centers are an essential pillar of Singaporean food culture. There are these big centers that have various stands of all sorts of different cuisines. You can find really any sort of dishes in these places. They're very inexpensive, very affordable, so that anybody can have a meal there for a very low price. And to an outsider, it's a really unique structure. I can't think of anywhere else that has this place that brings people together in that way, brings families together at such affordable prices. And the food is relatively basic, but often delicious. And what's amazing is, you know, if ever you're talking to a Singaporean or whatever, everybody knows that, oh, that hawker center in Newton does the best curry, or that hawker center in East Coast does the best nasi goreng, and there's very strong opinions on these things, and very strong. Yeah, it's for me. It's from my observational point of view, it's a very important pillar of life in Singapore, and it's a great one because it means there's amazing food accessible at very affordable prices. So I thought it was a very interesting element of Singaporean culture.
It's definitely this great unifying like element in our society, because no matter how like rich or poor or whatever, you know, everybody eats at a hawker center at some point in their life, and eats at it, like I say, really regularly. Yeah. What I've often thought is like about, you know, because like the average Singaporean, I enjoy hawker food tremendously, and the price, right, like you mentioned, is so affordable. Like I've had conversations with my husband about how much we would be willing to pay, like, you know, because we don't know how long these prices are gonna remain low, right? You know, you look at how expensive almost everything else in Singapore is, right? And how what we would be willing to pay, right, for that bowl of prawn noodles, or that plate of fried noodles. And like, you know, because it's so you can't replicate. You can get the same ingredients and you can try to cook it maybe in your own home, but I can tell you that it will be very hard to replicate that taste, right? Yeah, because of like the strength of the fire they use, or I don't know what it is. So I've had conversations with my husband about like how much we would be willing to pay for this plate. Like it's maybe $3, and how high we would be willing to go pay for it.
And I'm sure it'd be quite high, because some of these places are in fact Michelin starred, right? And sometimes if you go to a hawker center, you'll see one stand that has a queue of 50 people in front of it. And, you know, you realize that that's probably the very popular one, and they could probably charge a lot more for what they're selling. I just find it a really fascinating aspect of Singaporean culture.
Yeah. And especially living abroad, like now, right, in Melbourne. So like here, like you can get nasi lemak, right, but it's like for almost $9 Aussie, right? And then,
Yeah.
and you get a desperate Singaporean that would be willing to pay for it, right? Because that's the only way we can get it. So, yeah, curry puffs for $4.75. I mean, I'm thinking about it.
Exactly. I mean, but interestingly, the flip side of that coin is that, so I'm French and living in Singapore, eating cheese was a huge luxury because cheese is very expensive in Singapore. So there was that flip side of the coin, which was you'd get this, the local food was very inexpensive, but if you wanted to eat imported foods, like in Australia, Singaporean food, it gets very expensive. Next question, what future projects do you have in mind at the moment? Any other books in mind? Any other formats? More poetry, perhaps? Are you working on anything at the moment?
I am actually working on my second book. I have to keep telling everybody that I promised them that it will not take me 10 years to write my second book. But I'm working on my second book, and it's about, it's still nonfiction, right? I wanted like a change of pace, and I'm writing about my dog, actually. So I adopted a dog when I was in Guam, and she's like a golden Labrador mix. Like, I adopted her from the pound, and she was like 6 weeks old, and then she kind of like basically traveled around the world with me and my husband whenever we relocated. So she came back, from Guam to Singapore, and then she moved to Shanghai with us, and then and like I just wanted to write a book about, because I thought it'd be fun, about her adventures in all these different places that and her experiences in all the different places that we lived. And I thought like I wanted to do something about that spoke about this like bond between humans and dogs, which I feel is something very like special, and I wanted to add to that conversation or to that category of books that that dealt with the subject matter. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Fantastic. And so when is that likely to be out? You said it wasn't going to be 10 years.
I told my publisher, I said, I'll have it out to you. Like, I will send you the first my first draft, like, near the end of like the beginning of this year. Like, and like now it's almost June, and I'm still working on it. Oh, yeah, but it's so hard to write, but I'm excited about this book because I feel like in its own way it's really hard to write, and I wanted to write something uplifting, after like the magic circle and all that, but actually, as all dog owners know, there's this terrible thing that comes, which is like when your dog dies, right? And then so Fudge, she died in 2020, right, at the age of 13, and but I knew that she couldn't, because I started it before she died, and I knew that she had to die before I could finish the book, right? And but of course, like with anything, like when she died, like I couldn't, and the reason why it's been taking so long is like after she died, I couldn't write for 1 year. It's like I had to process the death, and and then before I could come up with an ending, and then so now like I had one like a rough draft, but I need to like put it in, I need to edit it a little bit more before I can send it to my editor. So and I feel like and I also have an idea of like developing it into a series of children's books. Like Fudge in Guam, Fudge in Singapore, Fudge in Shanghai, and and like I've also like I signed up to do a course on like children's book illustration and how to storyboard and a children's book and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, even if like nothing comes of it, I think that it's like an important like it's this thing that I just want to learn. Yeah.
And it sounds like a great process to develop something new on this really fun story. Fantastic. Well, Charmaine, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed speaking with you. And thank you again for your wonderful book, The Magic Circle, which I recommend to any of my followers watching this. It's a very powerful, emotional, and sincere book on the passing of a loved one and the process of that. And I really enjoyed it. And you get a great glimpse of Singaporean families and Singaporean culture in the process. Charmaine, thank you again for your time today. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks, me too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.